talk about some of the ways that money can find itself to royals in a more general sense. So some things we've spoken about before is this fascinating method that the King of Spain's mistress spoke to you about, whereby money is basically laundered through jewellery. Talk about some of the ways royals can be paid.
Yeah, she was very interesting. I mean, particularly in the Middle East, a lot of it is giving very generous presents, often jewelry. And, this jewelry has to be declared. There is a royal gifts list, but what seems to emerge is not everything is declared on that list. Again, that's all part of the window dressing. Certainly at Sunninghill, the Yorks had this big room called Aladdin's Cave, where a lot of the things they'd been given, particularly wedding presents, but I think other things were kept. And I think one of the interesting things that the mistress said was that how the royal family use often celebrity jewelers to basically take stones out, resell them, and basically, launder this money. I think also what's become very clear is that if you were to launder money, the royal family is a good place to launder it because, of course, there's no proper examination of their accounts or anything. And one of the concerns about Bank Haviland was that this was a very easy way Coots and all these companies have very strict regulations. I don't think those regulations were perhaps quite as strict with people like Bank Haviland. And so that was a very good route to get money out. And clearly, there have been a number of these property transactions, particularly Sunninghill, which have raised all sorts of concerns that this was money laundering. Partly the extra 3 million that was paid to Andrew was a sort of a thank you for his help in Kazakhstan, but also a way of getting money out of the country and kind of into circulation abroad. So, I do think the National Crime Agency has a case to investigate the Yorks, certainly, about their, and this was something that was called for by MPs 20 years ago. And that's no one's really been talking about that. And I've certainly offered to give material I've got to the National Crime Agency. No one has come forward from there. So, we're all focused on Epstein, Andrew, and trafficking or the misconduct in public office, but there are all sorts of other areas that I think could be investigated. So maybe that's something, that MPs should be looking at as part of a wider investigation.
And again, we see the repetition of a pattern here with Andrew dealing with dodgy people despite warnings. So let's talk about his dealings with this Chinese businessman who was also trying to get information from MPs. Andrew was warned against him by the Secret Services, continued to have a business relationship with him. And it's hard not to come to the conclusion that Andrew was betraying essentially the country, not for reasons of ideology, but purely for greed.
Yes, I mean, I think the whole national security element to the whole scandal hasn't really been properly explored. I mean, very difficult to do so. But clearly, one of the vulnerabilities that intelligence agencies abroad, particularly places like China and Russia, realized was through the greed of the Yorks that by offering to be giving them money to be brand ambassadors or directors or whatever, they could get into the royal family, give themselves a certain amount of respectability, and get introductions to useful people. And I think that's what went on. I mean, Ten Bo, the alleged Chinese spy that has been banned from Britain because of his links with Chinese government officials, is only one of many people in the York circle who I think, they should be very careful about. There's a man called Johnny Hon that I write about who was brought Sarah Ferguson as director of Gate Ventures and paid a large sums of money, wouldn't say what was for, she wouldn't say what it was for. But Johnny Han has close links both to the Chinese government and the North Korean government, and has tried to ingratiate himself with other members of the royal family. At one point, he was selling Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace with Prince Philip to rather naive Chinese investors. And, I know that one of the concerns that was raised, and one of the reasons I think they decided to take action against Andrew, was about the national security element, particularly with China. And he's been using Tenbo clearly to use Pitch in the Palace to raise money for him there. He has a Chinese bank account. And we've never really got to the bottom of what Tenbo was doing in China on behalf of Pitch. New materials come to light about Pitch in the Middle East too, which continued after the whole thing was shut down. And Andrew's been drawing money from Pitcher Palace Global, up to the present day. I think there was £200,000 he took out the other day. So when people say, where's his money coming from? It's coming from some of these ventures that go back many years, but ventures which were meant to be charitable and which turned out to be business activities. But I do think there are many more spies, around the Yorks than people realize. And, the Yorks have been useful idiots for them. Andrew at one point was trying to talk to people at the Serious Fraud Office about shutting down investigation into BAE. There's been lobbying at the Home Office for passports for people who were being investigated. So he's kind of been involved in political activities. I mean, we talk about Charles interfering in politics, but Andrew seems to have also been involved in making and lobbying on behalf of people. And that's all been covered up. And again, trying to ask FOIs about this gets one nowhere. So I think that, again, part of this wider investigation into Andrew's activities might look at some of those lobbying activities he was doing on behalf of some of these mates. You're absolutely right. At Eugenie's wedding, I mean, a lot of the guests there were convicted fraudsters and people who business associates, and not people that Eugenie knew, but were just thank yous from the Yorks to people who had helped them in business. And again, talking to a member of the royal household only a few weeks ago, they were saying that the Yorks were still entertaining business figures in royal palaces like Buckingham Palace very recently. I mean, neither of them have been working royals for a long time. And what are they been doing, giving access to a property which the public have just spent large sums of money renovating for them to do favors to some of their business chums? So I hope that, with these Epstein files, more of those connections will come out, there'll be more scrutiny and more questions asked about these people's involvement with the royal family and actually what was going on.